Ghost Mule here. It's the new year, and of course that means new gear. So I'm going to kick it off with a first impression review of my new Durston Gear Company X-MID 2. So for the past 5 years of backpacking, I've solely used my Big Agnes high volume ultralight 2-person tent. And generally, that tent has met all of my needs and been a pretty amazing tent to deal with. However, over the last couple of years, I've started to kind of increasingly have issues with it. Now, as nice as a piece of gear may be, if we use it for a long time, we tend to want to kind of overlook some of the issues that we have with it because, well, it's a great piece of gear and we feel the need to defend it because it's done us right for a long time. But over time, that very issue can become a bit of a deal breaker. And for the Fly Creek, my two biggest issues with it, frankly, were the fact that it had a single door, single vestibule, doghouse styled entryway that caused you to have to be part contortionist and part acrobat in order to get into your tent. And if you have to dislocate limbs just to get in and out of your tent past your gear, that can get a little bit frustrating after a while, especially when you're in your 40s. And so I decided it was time to set out to look for another tent. Now, I didn't have any particular tent in mind, but I did have some certain criteria that I wanted that tent to meet. Now, obviously, the biggest and most important search criteria that I selected for this was that it had to have at least 2 doors and 2 vestibules. This is because I used to have a MSR Hubba that in fact had both of those things. And it was really awesome to be able to store my gear in one vestibule while still being able to exit in and out of the tent through the other vestibule, which is really important when you're in the middle of the night and you really got to go to the bathroom. You don't want anything delaying you. Now, of course, common wisdom states that if you increase the features on a tent, you're probably going to increase the weight. And so I accepted the fact that I probably would be increasing my base weight a little. But my other criteria was that I wanted to stay within a certain amount of closeness to the current weight of my tent, which is about 2.5 pounds. And finally, I wanted something that was affordable. Sure, DCF tents are awesome and they're extremely light, but they're also about $600 to $700. I simply didn't have the money to spend on that, especially if I was also going to be buying a pack, which we'll talk about that in some other video from now. And so, as my tent search started, I of course started with some of the stuff we sell in the shop, which are the more conventional items. I looked at things like the Big Agnes Copper Spur 2, as well as the Big Agnes Tiger Wall 2, which is essentially the same as the Fly Creek, but it has 2 doors and 2 vestibules, which met my criteria. I did lean a little heavily into Big Agnes because I've had really good luck with them in the past, and I didn't see really much of a reason to change. That being said, I of course did look at other options such as the MSR Hubba 2-person, as well as a few other brands that we carry at the store. And then I started looking a little bit at some of the cottage brands as well. And I quickly found throughout my search that this particular tent, the Durston Gear Company X-MID 2, was pretty much popping up everywhere. It was definitely a pretty popular tent these days. Now, until recently, I've been pretty old school in my approach, and frankly, fad things kind of didn't interest me because oftentimes there's a lot of hype and not a lot of performance behind it. So I was a little bit skeptical. But then I started seeing some of my closest friends starting to also get the X-MID 2, and it started to pique my interest, and so I started doing a little bit of research. So let's look at the facts, and just the facts, ma'am. The X-MID 2 is in fact a 2-person, 2-door, 2-vestibule tent. Unlike my current tent, which is semi-freestanding, it is a trekking pole tent. Now, unlike most trekking pole tents, these trekking poles are not configured in a linear fashion. The X-MID has a double offset tent pole design, which allows it to have a rectangular base like a pyramid tent, while still having 2 trekking poles to hold it up that don't come into interference in the entryways of either side of the tent. The X-MID is made of a 20 denier count SIL PEU material, unlike the Fly Creek, which is made of a SIL nylon material. The X-MID comes in at $300, and it weighs 39.4 ounces or 2.4 pounds. Conversely, the Fly Creek, my current tent, currently retails at $399.95, and it also weighs 2.4 ounces. And so the tents weigh exactly the same. Now you're probably thinking, why would I go with a tent that currently weighs the same as my other one does as a trekking pole tent? Aren't they supposed to be lighter? Generally they are. However, there are a few factors that made the weight not as much of an issue for me with this particular tent. So if you look at the Fly Creek and the X-MID 2 side by side, the first thing you're going to notice is the X-MID is considerably larger than the Fly Creek. The X-MID is 45 inches at its peak, and it's a 92 by 52 inch floor space versus the Fly Creek, which is 42 inches at height, 86 inches in length, and although it starts out at 52 inches at its widest point, it does taper down to 42 inches eventually. The total living space volume of the X-MID is 32.2 square feet inside the body with 23 square feet of vestibule space. The Fly Creek is 28 square feet of interior space with only 8 feet of vestibule space. So the X-MID has considerably more volume to it and livable space as well as storage, while still maintaining the same weight. And although my base weight may not be going down anytime with this particular tent purchase, my comfort and livable space while in my shelter is greatly improved. Now, in addition to the extra living space as well as the crucial 2-door, 2-vestibule configuration, there were several other things about this tent that definitely caught my attention. First was the material itself. And as I said, the X-MID uses a Sil PEU material versus the Fly Creek, which uses a Sil nylon like most tents do. The reason why this is a really important improvement is that Sil nylon, when it gets wet, tends to sag. And so if your tent isn't really taut to begin with, it's definitely going to be affected over time with rain as it absorbs that moisture and starts to kind of sag in. On multiple occasions with the narrowness at the end of my tent box, I have definitely gotten wet as it's gotten rained on because it has kind of pushed in onto the body of the tent. Never been a huge issue, but it's always been kind of a pain in the butt. Sil PEU, or polyester, does not sag when it gets wet. It maintains its shape, and it doesn't absorb as much water, which also means that it tends to dry a little bit faster. So that was definitely a benefit. Another really big advantage to the X-MID is the fact that you can set up the fly first and the body second. This, of course, is crucial if you're setting up your tent in the rain because it means your interior space will stay dry even though your exterior is being rained on. So with a little bit of practice, it's really easy to set up the fly first, and then you put the fly on the inside without even opening the doors. With the Fly Creek, you had to put the body up first and then put the fly on. And this basically turned the bathtub of your tent into, well, a bathtub. It would fill with water, and I would have to dry that off and let the area dry out before I could put my stuff on the inside. It was kind of a hassle. With the X-MID, that's not a problem because the bathtub, in theory, can be completely covered the entire time that the tent is set up. Now, because this tent is designed to set up the fly first and the body second, you can also use it, just the fly, as a shelter. It will comfortably hold up to 4 people and very easily be a great way to shut up a shelter and wait out the rain in order to just get through the night. So this would be a great way to just stay dry throughout the night as you're in camp. And then if the rain still hasn't stopped, you just click the body in and go to bed. Another feature that I really liked about this tent was the ease of setup. Now, I have heard some big horror stories throughout the years of trekking pole tents being notoriously difficult to set up because you're constantly cantilevering things and pulling things tight, and it takes a while to get used to setting them up. That's not the case with the design of the X-MID 2. So the rectangular base of the X-MID 2's fly means you only have to put 4 stakes in order to get started. The doors also have snaps at the bottom of them to make setting it up a little bit easier when you go to put the poles in. I'll get that in a second. The next step is simply sticking the poles in through the vent or through the door, sticking them tip up into the grommets on top of the tent, and then you extend the poles, and that's generally all you need to do to set it up. In fact, it's so fast, it's about half the time to set up my regular Fly Creek tent. So of course, when I got it, the first thing I wanted to do was set it up when the weather permitted, and so I did. And I made some really important observations of the tent when I got it out of the bag. The first thing I noticed is it is extremely well made. All of the tolerances within the seams are very tight, and the construction looks very well done. This is a odd geometric shaped tent, and so there are quite a bit of seams on them, and as best I can tell, it's put together extremely well with really high quality. In fact, the company actually mentions that it's made in the same factory that MSR and Mountain Hardware use. In addition, I was also impressed by a lot of the attention to detail that you see throughout the tent. For instance, the clasp at the bottom of the door that help you set up the tent without losing attention, as well as all the hardware is in pretty good shape, easily designed, and easy to use. The doors are also very conveniently stowed, unlike the Fly Creek, which uses a toggle system. The Fly itself actually uses magnetic straps to hold the doors open, And the interior of the body just has two simple pieces of bungee cord, which are really easy to tie around. And there wasn't a whole lot of fumbling. It's pretty easy to get the doors set up out of the way. Internally, there's also some really great storage, multiple pockets throughout. And the most unique thing about the X-MID, other than its offset poles, is the fact that the body of the tent, the bathtub, is actually offset and trapezoidal in shape. And this maximizes the amount of internal usage of the tent with minimizing the overall footprint. And lastly, I am absolutely amazed at the interior space of this tent for not having any kind of penalty in weight. I am 6'1", about 250 pounds. I am not a small guy. I can lay down in this tent without my feet touching the end and put my hands open over my head and still have room to spare. I would not have been able to do that in a Fly Creek. I always felt a little bit claustrophobic in there, so this is going to definitely be a major improvement. So this tent's got a lot of positives going for it, and I'm really excited to try it out. But of course, there's no such thing as a perfect thing, and I do have a few concerns along with this tent. Now, I did a lot of research before I bought it, and all the reviews were incredibly positive. In fact, the only real issue that I saw brought up on multiple times was the availability of it, which they have actually improved recently. But I do still have some other concerns. First off, although this tent itself is amazing, I'm sorry, Durston, but the tent stakes that you sent with it, they don't really impress me. In fact, when I was setting up the tent, I bent at least 2 of them. Now, I will say this. It's January in Montana, and the ground is super hard right now. So it might be a little bit unfair, but I definitely think I'll be switching out the tent stakes the first chance I get. The second concern I have, and some of the people that I've talked to have, is this being a non-freestanding trekking pole tent. I'm curious to see how it's going to hand up to the wind. Of course, the last trip I was on in the Wind Rivers, we had some pretty serious winds, and so it's definitely a concern. That being said, it seems pretty sturdy, and not only is it pretty sturdy, but there are definitely a lot of places that it does come with 2 guy lines, but there's definitely a lot of places on the outside of the tent to attach even more guy lines, as well as extra stakes. So I have a feeling that if wind is going to be a concern, if you add those extra things onto it, this thing's probably going to be pretty bomb-proof. My final concerns with the tent are going to have to do with tent placement. And as I said, this tent is considerably larger than my Fly Creek, and I have gotten really good at sticking my Fly Creek into tiny little places. So obviously I'm going to have to be very cognizant of the fact that this tent's increased size is going to limit the places that I can put it into. I definitely won't be snugging this tent into a little grove of trees like I could with the Fly Creek. And lastly, a lot of people, especially in this area, have a lot of concerns with non-freestanding tents because of the ability to stake them down in the ground. And I too shared this concern for a long time. However, my Fly Creek is in fact not a freestanding tent. It's semi-freestanding. I've used it for 5 years in and around most of the Rocky Mountains. I have never come to a point where I felt like I couldn't get it into the ground to get it set up. And so at the end of the day, this tent, the X-MID 2 by Durston Gear Company, met my major criteria. It definitely has 2 doors and 2 vestibules. It is approximately, actually completely the same weight of my old tent, and it was very affordable coming in at $300. It's actually less than the tent that I had before. But I bought that with a pro deal, so I'm not sure that counts. I probably shouldn't have told you that. And so I'm definitely excited to try this tent out. Actually, I'm really excited to try this tent out. In fact, I can't even wait. I think it's going to do really well, and I'm really excited to get out there and use it. I know it's done really well for a lot of people, and so, I hate to say it, but I think there's something to the hype on this one. In fact, my hiking buddy Jay, who also uses a Fly Creek, also wants to buy the X-MID. Corrupting people from day one. And so there you have it. That's the first look at my first of 2 big 3 switch outs that I'll be doing this year. Of course, the next one will be my pack, and I will review that when it comes in. But I'm really excited again to try this out, and let me know in the comments below what you think. And as always, keep hiking on.